Regulated and Relational, a bi-monthly podcast brought to you by the Attachment and Trauma Network. In today's episode, Julie and Tracy talk about comparison. Listen in as they discuss the influential role comparison plays in our lives and how it impacts our emotional well-being. Let's jump in.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Regulated and Relational, our podcast produced by the Attachment and Trauma Network. I'm Tracy Leonard.
And I'm Julie Beam.
And we're excited to share with you from both our personal experiences and our professional knowledge what it truly means to be attachment-focused, trauma-informed, and how we can help children impacted by early childhood trauma. So, Julie, I'm thinking I'm getting better at this podcast thing. I don't know that I'll ever be as smooth as you and Ginger. In fact, I don't even know what we should talk about today. So just say that.
Tracy, you're doing really well with this entire transition. And I know exactly what we should talk about today because you brought this up earlier. And now here you are just now comparing yourself to Ginger and me. And I don't think as human beings, we ever stop comparing ourselves to each other. It sort of feels like it's baked into being a human, right? In fact, Leo Fessinger was a psychologist in 1954 that coined the term social comparison theory, with his research showing that people can't really self-evaluate themselves without comparing themselves to their peers and measuring themselves against the people in their social groups. And this makes a lot of sense to me, given that I know that human beings are so relational. And so we want to live in connection. And part of that is comparison, striving to be like other folks or striving to not be like them, and making that assessment as is probably one of the things that we all do. I mean, I know I do it.
Yeah. And someone once said, I remember, comparison is the thief of joy. And actually that someone was Theodore Roosevelt. And,
Wow.
He definitely had a point. Comparing ourselves to others can very often have negative consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So as we often do here at ATN, we turn to Brené Brown and how she addresses comparison in her book, Atlas of the Heart. And Brené is quick to point out comparison is not an emotion, but it is something that certainly can drive all sorts of emotions that affect our relationships, that relational piece, and even affect our self-worth. Her official definition is comparison is the crush of conformity from one side and competition from the other. It's trying to simultaneously fit in and stand out.
Wow. That's a lot in that definition.
Yeah.
It's really interesting and pretty darn accurate, right? It's how we use comparison.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be the same, yet different, or yet better, maybe if we're being competitive. We want to not conform, because who wants to admit to conforming, right?
Yep.
But we definitely want to rank well in the overall ranking of how we compare to everybody else, right?
Right. Yeah. We want top scores. Yeah. Well, she also points out that competition says be like everyone else, but better, like you just said, and by everyone else, we're actually good at comparing ourselves to others who have a specific amount of a likeness, because that feels a little safer. We're in the same socioeconomic group, or the same approximate age, or the same gender, geographic region, or even the same career. And that does feel a little bit safer to compare within that.
It does. I'm never going to compare my house to the mansions in the wealthier part of our county, or my exercise ability to somebody who's in their 30s.
Right.
My brain just quickly disregards those as even being real comparisons. Right. Almost like I recognize that it's impossible for me to get there. And so I just don't dwell on that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Well, here's where research about the impact of comparisons on our emotional health gets really interesting, though. Most of us would assume that if we were comparing ourselves to someone that we perceive as better off than we are, we'd have negative emotions. But
Mhm.
if we were comparing to someone we perceive as not being better off, that we'd experience positive emotions.
Right.
But the research just shows both types of comparison, whether that's an upward or a downward comparison, can have negative effects on us, or sometimes have positive effects on us. So
Yeah,
there's no
interesting.
comparison. So if you struggle with comparing yourself to others, you already know the negative emotions that can pop up. Envy, jealousy, those are at the top of the list.
Hmm.
We often are very envious of what other people have obtained or what they possess. Um, Personally, I've used envy and jealousy interchangeably in my life, but Brene points out brilliantly that they're actually two very different emotions. Envy is when we want something that another person has, and jealousy is when we fear losing a relationship that we already have. So while we often say we're jealous of each other's vacation or new car, we're really envious.
Right. And that's interesting and also a little dismaying because being envious it culturally makes it sound bad, right?
Mhm,
People don't
mhm.
walk around going, I'm envious,
Yeah,
but they do walk around going, I'm jealous. Yeah, those
yeah.
those types of things. It's just more so socially acceptable. And since we're trying to fit in, we don't want to admit to that envy, do we?
Right. No, exactly. And envy can be all the way from, I wish I had an ice cream cone to, and I don't begrudge you for having one. I don't want you to have that promotion. I wish I would get it. I would rather you get fired so I can have your job.
Yep.
It's probably why none of us want to really describe our feeling as envy. Is
Right,
sounds really,
right. Yeah, it's all those movies where somebody does something bad to somebody because they're envious.
Mhm.
Jealousy seems to be so much more acceptable because we all understand that a person who is jealous, I mean, we innately understand that definition. A person who's
Mhm.
jealous is losing something, is losing a connection or a relationship, and everybody can sort of feel that. They can feel what that feels like. Yet jealousy too can lead to some dangerous things. I mean, like we've all seen those movies with, the bunny and Glenn Close and yeah, all the other, and I'm
Oh,
old
yeah.
and myself with that one.
Yes, yes.
I can't even think of its name at this point.
Yeah.
But all of the ones where the jealous lover does something really severe. Um,
Yeah.
but the problem is that both jealousy and envy, even when they're tiny and we aren't acting in those big ways, can lead to resentment.
Yeah.
And that resentment is so damaging to the person who holds all that judgment and frustration and anger inside of themselves. And over time, resentment that you don't heal, that you don't, like unpack and work on, makes you bitter.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
you know it takes a lot of courage to acknowledge that you're resentful and that you
Hmm.
have this resentment and to start to address it as your own problem instead of the problem of the person that you
Right.
resent, because
Yep. Yeah.
that's where you're putting it, right? It's
Right.
like they have everything I want, I've got nothing, they're the problem. Well,
Yeah.
really the problem is inside of me and
Myself.
it's going to keep
Mhm.
hurting me,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
We feed our own resentments because we perceive that things are unfair and even unjust, right?
Mhm.
And that has a root cause inside of us. And if we don't start expressing that and start to really examine it and draw boundaries around it, yeah, it can get really, really harmful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, to think of the age we're in now with social media, it's even
Mm.
easier to be
Yes.
envious or have jealousy and then that resentment from people. And then it really builds up because you might not have a relationship where you're talking to them on a normal basis anyway. It could be someone from, a previous
Mhm.
time in your life. And so
Mhm.
that really does
Yeah. Yeah.
build up
And
and it's good.
And I think, and I bet there are other people out there who are like me that have problems feeling resentful when a boundary has been crossed and the other person doesn't even know they've crossed the boundary. It's because I didn't say no or stop it at the beginning. Yeah. So then the resentment starts to build up. They've asked me to do something or participate in a way or get involved in a way that I really don't want to do and didn't want to do. And because of our, maybe because of our relationship or because I can't say no.
Yeah.
I'm there, right?
You're doing it,
yeah. And I'm starting to feel pretty resentful about that. And and even if it's a good thing or something that in other times I might not have enjoyed, but maybe I'm too busy or I have other things that are taking priority or I need to be focused in other ways. And so then I start to feel that resentment, and it really does. It impacts me internally, and then it starts to impact my relationship with that person too.
Yeah. Yep. Again, at no fault of their own. It's all on you because you didn't set that boundary or speak up and say anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. So just the act of comparison is usually not fair. You don't see what's going on behind the scenes in another person's life. You often don't take into account the obstacles, you have in your way that maybe weren't in theirs, or other parts of their life that are not so desirable. So when comparison gets into your head and when it really floods you with that negative self-talk, or that you're not good enough, you're never getting the good stuff, or you're the last one to succeed. It's time to press the pause button on all of that and really ask yourself, what specific negative self-criticism is this specific comparison feeding? One of our most popular stickers here at ATN when we have our exhibit booths and tables and that is our, name it to tame it sticker. And what a great strategy that is, say it out loud. This is feeding my belief that I'm not, enough because I haven't lost as much weight or, whatever it is for you. And that seems to be a really big one now, the experience. Everybody's on a weight loss drug, and how people are comparing how much weight they've lost with somebody else or celebrities that that they're seeing. And the body comparison thing has just been around forever. And it's not going to go away anytime soon, but
I wish we could wipe that out, especially for women, because it seems harder on us.
We should always be thinking to talk to ourselves like we would talk to our best friend. If he or she just said that that they weren't enough because I haven't lost weight, you'd give them lots of grace, you'd give them encouragement and love, to help break that cycle. And we need to do that for ourselves as well.
Yeah. And I want to circle back to that whole social media thing, because I think that, like you started talking about weight loss, and I'm thinking it really accelerated our self-hate because we're feeding ourselves this comparison of whatever's happening on social media, right? And seriously, that what we're looking at is everybody's perfectly curated, cleaned up versions of their own lives, right? I read something that really put this in perspective for me the other day. And it was to ask yourself, how many selfies have I taken in my phone that I haven't posted to social media? Like, just scroll through if you haven't deleted for a while and see how many. And it's because they weren't perfect. Maybe your smile wasn't perfect. Maybe there was somebody in the background. Maybe, oh, heaven forbid, your messy house was in the background of that. Whatever it was, you didn't use that one as part of your perfectly curated, cleaned up version of your life. So if you're choosing that perfection, everybody else is too. And so if you're starting to feel envious of what you see, you're seeing something that's probably not as real as you think it is.
Right. Yeah.
I love that one of my friends actually asked me recently when he saw me in person if my vacation to Jazz Fest a few weeks ago was as much fun as it looked on social media, because that means he was aware of that, right? Okay, it looked like fun. He was feeling a little feeling about it, maybe feeling that he wants to go to Jazz Fest, but he wanted to know. He asked it in a very fact-finding way. He didn't say he was comparing, but he he'd seen my vacation, and he's like, was it really that much fun? And I said, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But the first weekend was so hot that I thought we were just going to all melt, and that while there were great music, there was great food, there was lots and lots and lots of sweating, lots and lots and lots of crowds. And I said, and then the next weekend it rained, and there was lots and lots and lots of water. And so then we just laughed about that, recognizing that what I had posted, even though I'd posted a little bit about rain or heat or whatever, was far from what the real reality of it was, and that social media can be so skewing of our perceptions.
Absolutely. And it's a good thing then that there's no smell feature on social media. If you were all
Oh man, the day that it rained, we would have smelled like wet dog.
Yeah, he might not have been so envious. Yeah. So, I mean, I ask, is comparison ever really helpful? And I think, yeah, we can actually use comparison to motivate us, to achieve what we see others achieving, set goals and direction and be that encouraging verb that, but comparisons can also fuel our gratitude, both for not having some of the hardships others have faced, or for having people in our lives we can look up to. So comparison can be a good thing as well.
Right. It's like when we admire someone. When we admire someone, we want to be around them. We're inspired by them. And this is a comparison, right? And we often try to improve ourselves and make choices of how we try to work on ourselves based on the person we admire. We use them as a yardstick or an example.
Yep.
And this reminds me in the business world of something that Simon Sinek talks about, the concept of a worthy rival. And all of us business geeks out here, comparing your business to another business that's doing it better and is doing stuff very similar to what you're doing, right? And at least they're getting it better ahead of time. So, or some of the time. Yep. So you're like rivals, right? There's a little bit of competition that's happening there. But instead of feeling competitive in a negative way, like you would like to burn down their office buildings or something significant like that, it's competitive in an improvement way, to improve your own strategies and to see if you can, see if you can, maybe get ahead of them for a round and see and notice, in depth how they accomplish what they're achieving. And he points out, when he talks about this concept, that your worthy rival might be ahead of you sometimes, might be behind you sometimes, but it's what they teach you that's important, because it's not about winning or losing. Because, and this is a really valid point that I've tried to stress with my children growing up, is that we're not necessarily competitive with each other. The real competition is when we compete with ourselves, like getting to the next level ourselves. And that's where comparison can get really healthy. Am I better than I was yesterday? Am I improving in this measurement?
Yeah. Yeah. Putting it into that time perspective is that's really a key. I like that. So what a great way to wrap up our conversation on comparison. We may not be able to stop comparing ourselves to others, because that seems to be a universal part of the human experience. And I'd never call you or Ginger my rivals, although I do admire what you've talked about on this podcast for the last 5 years.
Yep.
If we channel that comparison, and if I can channel that to motivate me, for all of us to, focus on what we admire and make it about competing with ourselves, we will be healthier and happier. So, thanks everyone for tuning in.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Regulated and Relational. In our next episode, Ginger and Tracy talk about how amusement can easily shift into sarcasm. A special thanks to Joe Kramer for donating the music. To learn more about the Attachment and Trauma Network, visit us at www.attachedtrauma.org. I'm Lauren Cassis, and as always, thank you for listening.